Hi, DIY Mark here. Just received this Ridgid wet dry vac from Home Depot and they've asked me to review it, so I thought I'd take you along in a little video review. Let's open it up, see what accessories it comes with, do a little usability test, and then compare it to some of the competition and see how it does. So I'll start to assemble it here. It's pretty straightforward. It's a little more stocky than I anticipated. Been a little bit bigger around than my shop vac. But as far as assembly, it looks like it's pretty straightforward. There's only a couple screws. Everything else is pressed to fit. So it looks like the casters go in here. They give you some casters and then these little mounting things. And then the only other thing you have to mount is this handle. So after a couple minutes of quick assembly, everything kind of snaps together. Like I said, there's two screws that go through the top to hold the handle on. This is the storage mode that they call it in the manual. The hose is supposed to wrap around the top, and then the accessories are supposed to plug into the casters. It works okay. You can see it's kind of cobby. I mean, any kind of movement and the hose wants to flop off of it. But it's an okay design. So I've also begun to kind of goof around with it. Pull off the top here and see how it's constructed. Pretty simple design. It's just got a paper filter. And then I guess the bags are an accessory, which I would definitely use because, as you know, trying to clean these filters when they get really dirty is a pain. I don't know if I mentioned, this is a $49 model. I also like the way they've done this hose. It's got this kind of extra flexible ends, and then it kind of connects, which works okay. I can see that's probably better than just friction. You just plug those two together, and you can see that it kind of snaps together, which is nice. It also has a rotating end so it doesn't get twisted, which is nice. And then this is a little different size than I'm used to. It's a little bit larger than 1 1/4. So I'm going to get my scale out and see how big this is. Comes with a nice long cord. It's about 10 feet by my measurements. Although it is made out of that cheaper vinyl, so as you can see, it kind of keeps its memory. It doesn't lie real flat. So since I had it coiled up, it wants to go back into the coiled, but it works okay. So I have brought out my shop vac, which is what I use in my garage and shop most of the time. It is also a 6-gallon. The Ridgid claims to be a 3.5 horsepower, and the shop vac is a 3 horsepower. Don't put a lot of weight in the horsepower claim. It's more about suction and ease of use, as long as they're in the same ballpark. You can see the Ridgid is a little more squatty, a little wider, but generally the same design. The Ridgid also has a larger hose than the shop vac does. They claim this is a 1 7/8. It actually necks down to 1 5/8 by my scale at the juncture. Let's do a head-to-head comparison of sound and of suction. So for those of you that are familiar with my other shop vacuum comparisons, I use this tool, which is a gauge that tells you how much inches of water vacuum the vacuum has. You plug it into the hose, and then you can see by the needle by how much vacuum is pulling. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but it's great for comparison purposes between 2 or more shop vacuums. You can see how they compare to each other. So actually very respectable. Let me, just for comparison, I'll show you the shop vac with the same test. Not a full apples to apples comparison here. The shop vac has a HEPA filter in it and bags, and the bag in it is well over half full. But let's just see how it does in comparison to the Ridgid wet dry. So the Ridgid is substantially more powerful than the shop vac. We'll do a follow-up comparison test after I've ran the Ridgid with actually sucked some dust in it to see how much it degrades. But I'm pretty impressed with the suction power of this new Ridgid. The next test I want to run is using this little simple sound meter. Again, I'm not sure how accurate this meter is, but it works really well for comparison purposes. If I shut up for a second, you'll see it drops down into the 30s. And then while I'm talking, it's high 60s. So what we'll do is we'll just fire up the vacuum and then kind of walk around and see how loud it is.
Overcome the noise of the vacuum. Definitely hearing protection.
So I would definitely have to use hearing protection to use this vacuum for any extended period of times, like to do sanding, but not overly loud. I've got other vacuums that have been louder. Let's quickly do that with the shop vac so you can kind of get a comparison.
But not as loud as the shop vac or the wet dry vac, Ridgid wet dry vac.
So the shop vac is loud, but definitely quieter than the Ridgid wet dry vac. Just a couple dB is a substantial difference in sound pressure on your ears.
Test, I thought I'd make a mess and use the shop vac to pick it up to see how well it does for pickup. I've got some interesting things to try. I've got a dustbin here full of shavings and such from my big dust collector in the shop. I've got some cutoffs that I got from the miter saw, and I chopped up some a little bit smaller and left some a little bit bigger. I'd say, obviously no bigger than what will fit in the hose, but we'll see what gets left behind. I thought I'd throw in a couple other interesting things. I got a few nails and staples here, various sizes. Those always seem to create problems and they're a little heavier, so it's a little harder for them to pick up. And then lastly, the ultimate test, I think, and I got some drywall texture, which I thought would be a really good representation of drywall dust, which I'm constantly on job sites, cut any kind of little hole, it always makes a lot of dust, or drill anything into any wall, so we'll put a cup or two of that on there. It also clogs filters pretty quickly, so what I'll do is I'll just kind of throw it on the floor and let the camera roll, and we'll see how it does. So before I start to see how this picks up, I thought I'd mention I have installed a vacuum bag in this, and I have the standard filter in here. So that'll make it a little bit easier, but we'll see how well it comes out as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So a couple comments about that cleanup. It did clog a couple times. It seemed that some of the bigger wood blocks were too much for it. They got trapped in the hose and caused a clog. But overall, it did a pretty good job. It really struggled with the staples, the larger staples. It got a lot of the small staples, but the electrical staples,
it just were too heavy and too awkward. It just pushed them around. What I want to do next is we'll open it up and see how much we filled up. I can tell that it's quite a bit fuller, and obviously that was that. So we'll pop this out, and actually looks like it's probably about a quarter full right now. I also want to mention these bags. So this is a 6-gallon vac, like I mentioned at the very beginning, but the 6-gallon bags for the Ridgid do not fit. You actually, and it calls for the smaller bag, the 3 to 4.5 bag. I bought both, tried to see if I could fit this in there, and it's just too big. This is a new style. Interestingly enough, it doesn't say anything about this vacuum on the package, but that's something to make note of. You need to use the smaller bags. That does reduce the capacity of this. So even though they call it a 6-gallon, you're going to use the 3 to 4.5 gallon bags in it.